and welcome again to Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you very, very much for joining us. We're very pleased to have you with us in what I hope will be a very, very interesting conversation. I invite you to visit the website, jewishsacredaging.com. And if you'd like to make a suggestion or a comment about these shows, please feel free to email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. We're going to talk about something that is on the front pages of a lot of conversations amongst our colleagues. And for that, we welcome Rabbi Dan Ross, who is the Director of Alumni Engagement at the Hebrew Union College, the Reform Seminary. Rabbi Ross has just completed and is ongoing a series of investigations, research, op-ed pieces in E-Jewish Philanthropy about the current condition of rabbinic recruitment and the role of the rabbi and the changing face and the changing nature of the American non-Orthodox rabbinate. Lots to discuss because I'm sure some of you may know one of these people. Rabbi Ross, thank you for joining us. How are you? Nice to see you again. How's the family?
I'm good. Thank you very much. And I just want to say it is an incredible honor to be speaking with you today Rabbi Address has been my teacher for many years, including overseeing, I have to say, the Doctor of Ministry demonstration project for which the research we'll be talking about today. So
right. That was the birth of a lot of this stuff. I guess the easiest first question is, Dan, what drew you to this issue of rabbinic recruitment and the pipeline into the rabbinate and why people choose it as opposed to what, say, my generation people chose it? Did you have an aha moment on the 6 train one day in New York?
I mean, I guess it would have been the 6 when I first moved into the city because I did live on the Upper East Side. So,
Yeah, I know my subways.
You do know your subways. Then I was a Brooklyn guy and now I'm in Queens. So it's the EF all day for me. But what I'll say is that this actually was the project that we're talking about now was revisiting a project that I did as an independent study when I was in rabbinical school, interviewing my classmates on their journeys to the rabbinate. And I guess I just got very interested in what it is that draws people to commit themselves, not just to this profession, but to this calling, to this life. And I wanted to understand the habits of mind, the interests, what inspired them, what drew them. And I guess in a little way, I was thinking about this, Richie, when you asked the question, is that it may even be a little bit of narcissism here, because it's also a little bit of like trying to understand myself, right? Like, what is it that makes, and to understand you, what is it that makes us tick, who we are, what draws us to this life? And that's just the basic, what drew me to the question. And then there's the urgent matter of the fact that fewer and fewer people are choosing to join us in seeking out the title rabbi, and seeking out that leadership, that chance to be a spiritual leader within the Jewish community. And so I wanted to better understand what it was that we could learn from those folks who had successfully started the journey, to encourage other people to follow in their footsteps.
Are we in a crisis?
Yeah, absolutely.
Really?
The data is really bad. I mean, you talked about the ATRA study. So the ATRA study is a study that came out in November. ATRA is the Center for Rabbinic Innovation. And we have just been seeing a precipitous decline in enrollments in non-Orthodox seminaries over the course of the past 20 years and prior to that.
But there's an explosion of seminaries. I mean, when I entered HEC back in the days before cell phones, which is like, the dinosaur age. It was the Hebrew Union College. It was the Jewish Theological Seminary. It was the Reconstructionist Seminary. JTS and HEC were the big paths. And there were lots of people. And yes, it was in the 60s. So it was a lot of people going to the seminaries to avoid the war in Vietnam. But there was no explosion of these online seminaries, alternative seminaries, renewal seminaries. There's a lot more options for people now. But yet you're saying we're in a crisis and not enough people are applying. Why?
So that is a question that ATRA kind of sought to answer, I would say. To your point, Richie, about the volume of seminaries, you're absolutely right. There's more seminary. And what's different, by the way, also is that people are actually comparing seminaries between each other. They're comparing them on financial aid merits, right? Like what kind of financial aid packages they're getting. But they used to be that if you grew up a young Reform or conservative Jew in America, you knew that your ideological commitments would lead you to Hebrew Union College, would lead you to Jewish Theological Seminary, Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies out at AJU, American Jewish University. But you would go to a seminary because it met your ideological commitments, the way that you grew up. And now there's a marketplace of seminaries. And what's happened is that places like Hebrew Union College are competing for a smaller pie of students than even existed. So if you look at the total number of students who are enrolling in non-Orthodox seminaries, so the big 5 progressive accredited seminaries, it's getting very close in terms of total number of students to what Hebrew Union College would have seen at its peak. So yeah, so the total number of students to go around. So it's competing for a smaller share of a shrinking pie, ever shrinking pie. So that's where we are in terms of the crisis of the moment. Now, ACTRA's research that they published in November points to, and I think that there's a lot of validity to this, that the solutions are practical, that there is a considerable desire out there among people who want to be rabbis, but they just can't get through the door. And the reasons that they can't get through the door is because programs are too long. So, for example, if you want to go to HUC, you've got to go to school. You got to commit to going to school for 5 years. The first year of that is the Year in Israel program. So you've got to commit to moving your life overseas. At other seminaries, they also require a year in Israel at some point during 5 years. Some seminaries, depending on the amount of Jewish education you enter with, you have to commit to 6 years of education, plus the tuition, plus all that formation. And it's a lot. It's big commitments for people. You've got to move to different cities. And so one of the things that that other seminaries, Hebrew Union College included among them, have been considering is alternative pathways. And actually, HUC just last year launched its virtual pathway. So the idea that ACTRA is pointing towards is, are there ways that we can remedy the door that people have to walk through, the structural barriers that people have to walk through to get into rabbinical school? What I am interested in is, in addition to evaluating, those kinds of barriers that prevent people from going to rabbinical school, is what kinds of people are the right people to be going to rabbinical school in the first place. And the reason that I think that this is significant is that another point that the ACTRA study discovered is they called it a quiet emergency of burnout among folks in our profession, Richie. And I would say quiet is an understatement. It's not quiet at all. And I actually think that there's something to this idea of not just lowering the barriers for people to become rabbis, but being sure that the right people who are going to become rabbis. And what I mean by that is it's not an elitist thing. It's identifying the people who are going to find themselves fulfilled in rabbinic work. Right? That when they start doing rabbinic things, that is going to be life-giving for them. And that will be sort of a way to, on the front end, address also this burnout crisis that we're seeing.
Let's also be clear. That also seems to be, from what we've talked about, it, and I did attend a workshop that you did on this, not everybody is tracking into congregation land. Is that correct?
It's very true.
Is that another major, to me, that's a major shift in the rabbinate?
What percentage of your classmates went into congregations, Richie, would you say?
I would say at least 75%. In our day, we had a quota for the chaplaincy because of the war in Vietnam, which we filled. I think 3 members of our class went into the chaplaincy. 1 or 2 went into postgraduate work, academia, but the overwhelming majority, at least 80%, were tracked into congregation land. Yeah.
So it's definitely decreased. If I remember in the ACTRA data, it's getting closer to 50-50. It's still more rabbis are going into congregational work, but it's getting closer to 50-50. And one of the other things that's borne out in the data is that folks who are non-congregational rabbinates, which we need to figure out a better word for that. Like it's non-congregational, just like doing rabbinic things, right? That they are more fulfilled in their lives, that burnout is lower, and that the one thing that they aren't attaining to the same degree of satisfaction as their peers who do go into congregational work is income. And we do. It's very true. It's very true. And so that's something that we do definitely need to investigate. So in my research, I found that there were, I called them rabbinic personae. I found that there were 6 ways that people self-actualized, or 6 behavioral things that they did that tended to come up again and again and again in different kinds of people that I interviewed on their journeys to the rabbinate. So in total, I've done this interview for the project that I did with Richie. I interviewed 12 recent rabbinic alumni of Hebrew Union College. And then I would add in the 15 folks who I interviewed back in when I was a student about 10 years ago too, to have a data set of about 27 people. And I knew that I was onto something with the first one when I kept hearing people say, I was always in a musical. I was always on stage. And I was like, wow, like everybody in this group was on stage or in theater or did something or was a musician. There's something to this. And so I realized that there was a performer persona. So that was number one. And then I would also meet and have conversations with folks who would say, well, I was always knocking on doors for a campaign. So we have an activist, we have a politician, we have somebody who's politically engaged. I would find folks who would say that they came alive intellectually for the first time when they started learning Jewish things. Those are our scholars. I would meet folks who would say that they just loved teaching. And they found themselves being involved in youth and things like that. And then the last, this is the hardest one to kind of figure out when you're a kid, right? I was really focusing on people as they were growing up. I would say they would be people who would say, I was the person who my friends always came to,
right,
when they needed support. That's your pastor. And then a sixth I found in this new round of research that I did, which is what I call the community builder. So that's the person who's like convening your chess club or is the Shabbat dinner host, is people who liked to bring people together. A lot of those overlap in congregational rabbinic skill sets, right? Like you can understand why, in particular in the Reform Rabbinate, a very strong performer or someone who really likes performing would be well suited to lead tefillah and be very good at that. And at the same time, other rabbinates you mentioned, Richie, that, you had a quota of people that went into chaplaincy. Those are people who manifest as our self-actualize as our pastors, right? And so one of the things that we're trying, I haven't done the research on yet, but would be a really interesting area for future research, is to kind of do a census of rabbis who are in different fields and see how they kind of lay out along these personae, which, by the way, are not mutually exclusive. They're just ways that you lead with your rabbinic identity. I'm curious, Richie, like, you're familiar with these 6 now. Do you have any of them that you particularly find yourself, like, when you heard about the performer or the pastor, like, who are you as a rabbi?
I will say there's a little bit of everybody in there, a little bit of every one of those. And I think I'm thinking about most of my colleagues in my career, which is now long, with the possible exception of the scholar rabbi, the colleague who says, I'm in academia, I have my PhD, I am studying, I'm writing books. My personality does not, I don't want to deal with the ritual committee meeting or the board of directors meeting or that and the other thing. I'm not good with kids, but I'm very good at immersing myself in the academia world. That's sort of like a niche that is there. But I think if you take a look at a lot of the colleagues who are very fulfilled in their rabbinate, there's a little bit of everything in here.
Mm-hmm.
One of my questions to you, though, based upon your research, I got turned on to the rabbinate through my own rabbis, Dr. Korn of blessed memory, Dr. Rabbi Kaiman of blessed memory, and my involvement at Camp Harlem, one of the Jewish camps. That sort of like guided me. Is that in your research now, or is that a typical pathway, the camps and the mentor?
So the mentors I'll say more about. Camps, because that's an area of specific research focus for me, but camps are certainly a pathway. They came up not infrequently among the stories of people that I spoke with. Are they the kind of pathway that they once were during your day, Richie? I would say probably not. They were definitely like a checkpoint that many people met along the way, but they weren't, and they haven't been for some time as central to the to this pipeline generation as it has been previously. The other thing that I should say, by the way, and that I haven't done as much research into, is that one of the things that's important is that the rabbinate, the face of the rabbinate, is also changing, with a lot of folks choosing to come into this in second careers.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the second career. Most of the people I talk to are second career people.
Yeah. And so that, by the way, in terms of lowering structural barriers, is another key piece of this, because people who are coming into the rabbinate from a second career have different, ways, established lives with their families and things like that. I was 25 years old when I upped and moved to Israel, and everybody in my family was healthy, and I met my wife in Israel, right? So, right, different. It also has been a guest on this podcast. So, but circling back to mentors.
Yeah, the mentor thing,
mentors. And the reason I want to spend some time on this is because my Doctor of Ministry project that I did with Richie was in two different parts. The first part I just talked about, which is who are the kinds of people who are becoming rabbis today. And then in this first independent study that I did, one of the accidents, I interviewed 15 students, and I discovered that 3 of them had the same mentor, 3 out of 15. And I said, that's crazy. Okay. And so I realized that there must be out there some sort of category of like super mentor or super refer, that like you might call them a rabbi factory. Because I had this professor at HUC who said to me once, we were talking about the recruitment crisis, and he said, if every one of my rabbinic alumni sent me one student, I wouldn't have a recruitment problem. But we know, just based off of the basic arithmetic, that that's not what we're seeing. So, and at the same time, there are some really exceptional mentors out there. So what I did was I interviewed 10 super mentors, people who had sent over the course of their career anywhere from like 6 to 26 people to rabbinical school. And by the way, it didn't necessarily just have to be HUC. It could be any rabbinical school. I know that some folks who send people off to different rabbinical schools to try and figure out what characterized them. And you talked about your mentor inspiring you, Richie. The number one thing that unified these mentors, and it is worth explicitly stating, even though it seems so obvious, is the job satisfaction piece. These are folks who love being rabbis. They love being rabbis. One person, when I asked all of them, a part of the interview was, what do you like about being a rabbi? And she said, you're basically asking me what I like about myself. I had another guy who I interviewed who he said, I'm going to tell you a story that like makes me tear up. When I said, okay, go for it. I said, I was at an oneg, and a young lawyer approached me and asked to meet with me. And so I sat down with him in my office, and the lawyer said, I'm really unhappy in my career, and I don't want to be a rabbi, but I could tell in watching you for 5 minutes that oneg that you love what you do so much. How do I find something that I love that much?
Yeah.
How do you find something that you love that much? And so that's why I think that it is important that, again, going back to what we were originally talking about, we are also trying to find the right kinds of people to become rabbis who are actually going to enjoy this work, who are going to find it meaningful. The other thing that these rabbinic mentors very often did, and I'm curious if this is part of your story too, Richie, is that they would create leadership opportunities for their mentees.
Oh, yeah.
That they could take on rabbinic activities. Yeah.
I was given the opportunity when a congregation I grew up with, even when I was in undergraduate school, to start leading services.
Yeah.
And, you mentioned this, I think, in some of your writings and the workshop you did. It also has to do with finding one's own sense of meaning.
Yeah.
And which is ultimately the grist for the mill. If I can find meaning in this on a much more spiritual, existential level, then everything else kind of falls into place. It is a search for meaning, isn't it?
I, on the Seekers of Meaning podcast, I will say it is a search for meaning. But one of the things that I want to not discount that I think is really important is that when a person decides to become a rabbi, ultimately the story that they tell themselves about who they are has to end with them deciding to become a rabbi. And we can tell beautiful stories to that effect and describe our theological motivations, our interpersonal motivations. At the same time, I think that we shouldn't discount that there are people who are really good at giving sermons and public speaking, and they find themselves self-actualized in doing that. And it might not be that they know why exactly, right?
Yeah,
They just know that they like public speaking. They what do you, and so I actually am encouraging us to think, at least at the outset, a little bit less high-minded about this, right? If you are at the hospital and you see the, middle-aged volunteer who delivers challah every week, you could do this for a living. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not saying that volunteers and lay leadership aren't important. I'm just saying that one of the things that I did find in my research that surprised me a lot was how infrequent it was that either a rabbinic mentor or a current rabbi would say, that rabbi tapped me on the shoulder and said, you should become a rabbi.
Why? Why are we so reluctant when we see somebody like that, regardless of their age, to say, you know something, you have a gift. And there's a real way to serve the Jewish people and actualize that gift. Have you ever thought about entering the rabbinate? Why are we so afraid to do that?
I don't know. I love doing it. But I'll tell you that one of the most prolific rabbinic mentors that I interviewed, I think the most prolific rabbinic mentor that I interviewed, he said that every single person who he mentored into rabbinical school, the conversation was always the same. They'd ask him to say, what's it like to be a rabbi? I'm thinking of becoming a rabbi. And he said that he was shocked by every single conversation that he had like that. That he couldn't, and he even said, who am I to tell people what they should do with their lives? And I'm like, you're a rabbi. People are looking to be told. People are looking for that kind of direction. And I do think, I don't know whether it's humility. I don't know whether it's fear. Honestly, that's research worthy of another study, is why it is the case that it is not Atra found that only, and I say only here because it's pretty surprising that it was only 40% of folks in the rabbinate were specifically encouraged by a mentor to go to rabbinical school.
Interesting.
Only, right? So that number seems low to me. And by the way, that doesn't mean that the mentors weren't there. That's not what I'm saying. But that was a driving motivator. That we should be ashamed by that number. That's a number that's easy to get up a lot higher.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we have to end, I just want to ask you one question. There may be somebody, regardless of age, who will listen to this because they're interested or thinking about, what's the one piece of advice that you would give somebody who may listen to this and has been kicking around the idea of saying, this is something that I would like to explore? What would you tell them?
Sit down, find a rabbi, and sit down. Find a few rabbis, sit down and ask them what they do. And ask them to shadow them and see if you could see yourself doing that. That's what I would say. You'll learn the theology in rabbinical school, right? And you'll be able to tell a doozy, and I really don't discount this. You'll be able to tell a wonderful story about what inspired you to do this work, but figure out if you actually want to do the work, if you could see yourself doing the work. Because it is a job. It's a job. It's a sacred job. It's a very important job. It's the holiest work that there is, but it's a job. And so, just like going into any profession, I would encourage people to take the chance and job shadow if they can, and see if they could see themselves doing it.
Dan, is it more of a calling than a job?
It's interesting because one of the pieces of my research was also trying to figure out the extent to which people were comfortable with this term calling in Jewish clergy spaces, because as you know, Richie, it has Christian overtones. And certainly the idea of Hashem calling me, a lot of people were resistant to that. A lot of people would prefer to use the language of, and this is where I'll end, called to service. I think it's incredibly important, downright essential. This is a life that you should go into if you care about a life of service. If you want to dedicate your life to service, it's a beautiful way to serve other people. If that's not what you're going for, please find something else to do.
No, that's why, because to me, I've always talked to people considering this as it is a calling. It is a sacred calling. It's not a job where you put in your hours and you have your day off, or it's not, because you're available, especially in congregation land. You have to understand that it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if at 2:00 in the morning, you get a call from a congregant who's having, is in the ICU and they need their rabbi, you go.
Yeah.
You go, and you're going to sacrifice some family time, but there is a higher value. And I think when you say call to service, I think that's a very, very, because you are serving the Jewish people in a chain of sacred tradition that goes back thousands of years. That is very, very different. Rabbi Dan Ross, the Director of Alumni Engagement for the Hebrew Union College, thank you very, very much. Continued good luck with all the research, because you have just today, you just elucidated about 3 or 4 more research projects for you. So I don't want you to be bored on that subway ride back and forth to work. Say hello to the family for me, please, and keep in touch, okay? Take care, man. To all of you, thank you very much for joining us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. We are very grateful for your time and appreciate it very, very much. Please visit the website, jewishsacredaging.com. You'll find a very conveniently donate button if you'd like to support our work, and just click on that and follow the prompts. If you'd like to become a sponsor for some of these podcasts, also just email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. Until we see each other again, I want to remind you that Seekers of Meaning is produced at the Broadcast Center of Lubetkin Media Companies in absolutely wonderful Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And a big shout out to our producer, Steve Lubetkin. Until next time, take care of yourself, stay safe, stay healthy, and most of all, be kind to one another. Take care.